Hello, hello. Welcome to Journey to SEA 2024. And I am your host, Shelley-Ann Edwards Barron, a creative writing specialist. Now, for those of you who are new to the lives, I specialize in using multisensory learning in the creative writing classroom. Now, what that means is that I believe that learning about writing can be fun. And I also understand that in many situations, teachers and the circumstances under which they teach doesn't really allow them to implement a lot of activities in the writing classroom. As a result, many students don't learn about writing well and they develop negative attitudes toward writing. So I am on a mission to show teachers and parents how learning about writing can be fun, can be interactive, can include experiments and drama and games and all those things so that students can develop a healthy attitude toward writing. Because my belief is that writing is part of communication and it's so fundamental to who we are that it's absolutely important that everyone has a healthy attitude toward writing. So, in this series, I'm working specifically with creative writing for the primary school level, and we're working toward SEA 2024. And so far, this is episode 7. So far, we've been talking about what narrative writing is, what report writing is, and the various things that, strategies and skills that students need to learn in order to really perform well at those exams. Now, what we have done is what I have done is to sort of break things up into categories, and we're dealing with the skills before we get to writing complete essays. Now, for report writing, there's a long list of skills that students need to be able to master. For narrative writing, there's a list of skills that students need to master. And what we will be doing and what we have been doing in the series is to be looking at each of these skills. I'll be giving some ideas and some strategies on how you can implement and practice the skills with your child or your students. So if you're new, again, thank you. Welcome for joining us. For those who are joining the live, I appreciate it. And comments are welcome, questions are welcome, and I will try my best to answer the questions as best as possible. So now I'm a bit excited today, not only for what we'll be talking about, because I think especially with narratives, conflict is an absolutely important part of the story that many students don't understand fully. But tomorrow, I will be doing a professional development program at a primary school, working with the teachers to help them understand how to implement the multisensory learning and to give them guidance on what they can do in the classroom. So, a couple of weeks ago, I met with the teachers to find out what it is they needed and what their struggles were. And so now I am going to deliver the presentation. So, it's from 9 to 2 tomorrow, and I've been spending some time working on, tweaking the presentation, making sure that I have the practical activities. Because if it's one thing that I've understood over the years of teaching and interacting with other teachers is that, having the concepts and having the ideas, that's awesome, but the implementation, depending on your circumstances, can be a little bit tricky. And what is necessary is not just to, give the concepts and the ideas, but also to show exactly how it's done. And that's also part of the program that I'm working on with this SEA Journey to 2024 live. I'm really trying to give you as much information as I can within the time so that you can implement it. So if you don't have a copy of the schedule, you can go to SEA, the Peacefield Approach. A copy is in the files. You can go to my website, wordcoach.com. That's werdcoach.com, and there is a tab labeled Journey to SEA 2024. In there, you would find all the lives archived, as well as a copy of the schedules, one for report writing, one for narrative writing, that you can download. And you can see if you're not sure what to do and when and how to do it. download the schedule, and you can follow the lives to get more information. And even more good news, and my excitement is that I'll be getting back the textbooks for the materials that would be the workbook and the journal for the report writing series that I've completed, as well as the flashcards. I'll be getting them back soon. And it will only be a matter of a short time when you would have those materials so that as you follow along with the lives, you would be able to use the materials and have actual worksheets and documents that you can follow up with your child or your students. So lots of excitement happening there. All right, so but I know you're here today to get information about report writing and get information about narratives. So let's get into it. And as usual, I shall be working with the report writing first. And today we're talking about the formal language. And what I want to share with you about that has to do with something called formal tone. Now, I know with report writing, most when we're teaching report writing, students talk about the formal vocabulary and they need to learn, different words and better ways of saying things. That's for sure, because we're also building vocabulary in this process of writing. But that is only one aspect of the concept of formal tone when it comes to a report. So, yes, students need the formal vocabulary. And in the last session, we spoke a little bit about avoiding adjectives and adverbs and so on. But to really build and maintain that formal tone, the overall tone of the report, we need to look at a few more things, not just the vocabulary. So I have some definitions, on the screen, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So formal tone is more than vocabulary. I just mentioned that. And listen, I can say that over and over because sometimes students are so obsessed with the vocabulary and learning the formal words that they neglect the other aspects of tone, and therefore the writing isn't as formal in its overall impression as it should be and as it could be. And the thing with SEA is that while teachers work with the CLOG rubric, that's content, language, organization, and grammar, and we have that segmentation, the examiners work with the holistic rubric. So they're looking at the overall effect of the report and not just one or two other things. They're looking at how the student is able to combine these things to create an effective report. Part of an effective report is the formal tone. So, what is exactly formal tone? It's a combination of sentence structure, vocabulary, and organization. So when we talk about formal tone, this is not something specific to SEA reports. Formal tone is the kind of writing that you want to work with when you're dealing with academic writing, professional writing at all levels. And when I taught university, this is what we taught students to achieve with their research papers. So we want students to understand that whole sense of objectivity, the sense of, keeping your emotions out of things. And all of that is part of the formal tone. So, what's the main focus? We want a respectful voice. We want an objective voice. We want the voice to be thorough and it has to be direct. So, what does that mean exactly? Now, being respectful is something that I don't hear people talking about too much when it comes to writing, but formal tone is absolutely respectful. And you're respectful both to the reader as well as what it is you're reporting on. And this is how you can actually get to remind yourself about leaving out your emotions and so on, because you're not really trying to get somebody in trouble or you're not trying to, create an issue. all you are doing is giving the facts as you observed them, and the rest is up to the reader. So, in discussing information, the vocabulary that is used needs to be respectful, and that is one of the things being more formal with your vocabulary achieves. It allows you to be respectful and to speak about the participants in the report, and to speak about what they did and how people interacted in a very respectful way. So that's the one level of respect. The other level of respect has to do with the respect for your reader. You believe that your reader is, most times it'll be like a principal or a teacher, somebody in authority. And respecting that person means that you're mindful of their time. So you don't want to waste their time with irrelevant information or details that are not directly about what they asked for. So, in maintaining that respect, you would also pay attention to the kind of information that you include in your report. So, this concept of being respectful, while it might sound kind of odd, this is writing, we don't have a tone of voice. In writing, we also have tone still, and that tone, as we've just discussed, is represented and shown through the sentence structure, the vocabulary, and the way the information is organized. And being respectful means that the sentence structure suggests that the reader is knowledgeable and they can handle, more complex ideas, and they don't need the simple sentences, everything in a short, simple sentence. You respect that your reader is an educated person, and therefore you're going to present information in a way that would represent, how they can handle the details. So I think that being respectful in writing, especially in this idea of writing a report, is an important factor that is quite often overlooked. And it's something that teachers and parents, you can chat with the students, really help them understand how being respectful can impact on their writing. Okay, and then we're talking about being objective. So, of course, we know we don't want um, to include emotions. Yes, we are writing things from our perspective. This is what we saw. We don't know what everybody else saw. This is what we saw. However, we do want to not add any flavors to that. So, no opinions, no emotions, just the straight facts about what was observed. And then the idea of being thorough. Readers really want to get the sense that you've given them a complete version with the relevant information so that they have good understanding. So, no important details were left out because you're thinking of your reader, and well, okay, in order to truly understand what happened, they need this type of information, and they need the information presented in this way. So, being thorough is absolutely also a part of formal tone and making sure that your reader has what is needed. Then we're talking about being direct. This is also related to the idea of relevant information and sticking to the facts, because why is the person reading the report? They need certain details. They want an account of certain things. So we don't want to add in any extra information because, again, we're paying attention to being respectful, direct, thorough, and objective. So we really want to get to the point in the shortest and quickest way possible while still giving the right amount of information to help them understand it. Now, as we go through the series, we will be looking more into the different types of reports and other ways that students would need to develop their skills. So we will definitely be talking more about how to go about being direct and being thorough and being respectful and objective. But for now, make sure that as you work with your students or your child, that you start planting the seeds of that whole idea of being respectful in their writing as well as being objective, thorough, and direct. And, as I'm saying that, it occurred to me that I guess this is also one aspect of, what we call that hidden curriculum, values and so on, that kind of would come into the actual curriculum, how it can show up, because helping students understand what it means to be respectful is definitely something that we can have a whole series on that by itself. But this is one way, at least in the context of a report, that you can integrate and use some of that information there as well. All right, so this is understanding formal tone. So when we're talking about reports, we're not just talking about the vocabulary itself. When we say formal language, we're looking at formal tone as a whole and how that relates to sentence structure, vocabulary, yes, but also organization. So we have the 5 paragraphs that we work with, so that can give us a very neat and tidy structure to present the information. We're looking at, different types of sentences and so on. I think the next slide has some detail about that. Yes, so these are things that we want to avoid. So, abbreviations, contractions, two-word verbs, expressions and emotions, and many simple short sentences. These are the things that we want to avoid. So, abbreviations would be, now I can't think of any abbreviations, but you really don't want to, I guess in some cases, like acronyms and so on, in a report, in formal academic writing, you're allowed to use an acronym only after you have spelled out the entire word. So, for example, if we're writing a report on um, a situation involving WASA, that's WASA, that stands for Water and Sewerage Authority. So, if a student has to include that organization in their writing, the only way that they would be allowed to say WASA, WASA, in all capitals, is if they have previously explained Water and Sewage Authority, and then in brackets, open bracket, WASA, close bracket, and then afterward, your readers would know what that is referring to. But ideally, you absolutely, and I must count. I'll go back in this video and see how many times I said absolutely. Okay, let me stop. Um, it's necessary that you spell out the acronym the first time it's used, and I would recommend at least one other time. If you use it like 3 or 4 times, spell it out the first time, use the acronym, and then you can go back to spelling. But you really don't want to um, encourage the use of the abbreviations, um, and things like intro instead of introduction, vocab instead of vocabulary. We're not abbreviating any words. We're not using the uh, texting or TikTok kind of language. We really want to spell out everything, right? Now, contractions. So can't, won't, didn't, none of those. We want to spell them out. Did not. Um, you would also possibly want to use more formal language in that case. Um, Instead of saying, didn't do it, or wasn't allowed to do it, you can say something like was prohibited from. So we really do want to avoid altogether those contractions. Now, two-word verbs are um, a little bit tricky in the sense that there are some that are okay and formal enough, but you really do want to avoid things like, come back. You want to say returned, and go forward. you could say proceeded. So one of the areas that students could really monitor and pay attention to is the information they present and the verbs that are used to present that information. So they could go through and look for any two-word combination. Um, Sometimes they're called phrasal verbs. So that's PHRASAL, phrasal verbs. And so you can go online, do a quick search for that, and get more information about those verbs so that you can, you know, give students a list so they can check through their writing and give them the alternatives that they would need to use as well. Because remember, at this point, yes, students can come up with things, but they're still learning, they're still understanding, they're still practicing. So we really want to provide them with the details that they have to learn and not just simply ask them to produce when they're limited with their information. So you can ask them to search things up, keep a vocab list, and so on, and that would really help with building their vocabulary and helping them use the better terminology for their report. Expressions and emotions. So we have different sayings and things like similes and all those things. Sometimes you say, busy as a bee and, really busy, and those kinds of expressions that we use in our regular everyday speech and colloquial expressions and so on. We want to avoid those in reports. Now, we've already spoken about emotions, and I think the one thing that most people are quite aware of when it comes to report writing is to stay away from expression emotions. So nobody was angry, nobody was sad, unless it's presented in an extremely formal way by saying this person said they were angry or they said they were sad. We're not reporting any of our observations by forming those kinds of conclusions about emotions. We are not reporting our own emotions in a situation either. If we're participating in the report, we really want to avoid those things as best as possible. So, the simple short sentences. Um, in report writing, it's necessary to use a variety of sentence structures. So, I'm not suggesting that you have absolutely no simple sentences. What I'm suggesting is that you should not have three, four, five simple sentences back to back. A student should be able to at least use a compound sentence, which would be using conjunctions like and, but, and so on. Um, and the more popular ones in this case will be and, right? For the report, because you really do have to be careful of forming your own judgment. Doing like so, for example, suggests a certain kind of familiarity and intention and opinion, so you'd want to avoid that, right? That kind of recommendation. And so and just in that sentence I use the word so twice. You can see then how it's part of the way we speak quite often. And, many students write the way they process information in their mind. So it's something that you'd really have to have them look at, pay attention in their writing. Um, when it comes to dealing with the simple sentences as well, here are some, ways that I guess using more complex sentences can work as well. Complex sentences are when you have a dependent and an independent clause. The compound sentences are usually two independent clauses joined with an appropriate conjunction, and the complex sentences are what are usually created when you do and use effective transitions and transition words and phrases. So, like when this happened, before, after, those what we call subordinating conjunctions. Subordinating conjunctions contribute to the creation of the complex sentence. So during this week, this is the time when you check on the conjunction usage, check on the understanding of different coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions so that students are familiar with these and are able to use them effectively in their writing. So you'd want to, check in with the grammar. And while you're doing that, give them practice with these different things. And you want them to focus on that respect and so on in their writing, which is where complex sentences come in. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen like those like journal articles, like those scholarly journals where you have PhDs and doctors, writing articles and so on. You would find now some of them are so challenging to read because of the fact that all the sentences are complex and you might have like 3, 4 lines in one sentence. That's a little excessive for the level that we are right now, but looking at some of those can give you an idea of how sentences are structured, and that might help you with dealing with the students and getting them to recognize that, hey, what we're learning now with report writing is not just for you to pass the exam just in case you have reports for the creative writing component of SCA 2024. It's really about helping you recognize formal and informal writing and give you the foundation structures necessary to write in a more formal way. Because formal writing, like I said, academic, professional. So we're not just talking school, even though academic is really the main place, but we're also talking professional in terms of at work and these professional workshops and seminars and all these things. And life is going to be so much easier for students when they become adults if it is they have this foundation of understanding coordinating and subordinating conjunctions. All right, because that's the compound complex sentences happening right there, and that's going to make life really amazing for them in terms of expressing themselves. So do a quick check-in, see what students know, give them a few, and if students are totally unfamiliar with this concept of using subordinating conjunctions and phrases and so on, then the ones that are most appropriate would be those related to time and sequencing of actions. So there are many different kinds of subordinating conjunctions, but the ones that are appropriate for the SEA style report have to do with sequencing of actions and time. So before, after, during, when, while, those are the main ones. So you want to make sure that students are able to use those words effectively, use them in phrases, use them in sentences, so that by the time you come around to transitions and transition words and phrases, they would have already had some practice with this, and then you're able to guide them effectively in using it in a report and not just having to start from scratch. This is what's happening. So remember, what we're doing is that we are building and we're planting seeds that we're going to keep coming back to and mulching and watering and so on. And it's not just once you do something one time, that's the end of it. Writing doesn't work like that. And life doesn't work like that. So education, learning doesn't work like that. So we do have to reinforce and come back. So don't be too worried if it is that students are a little bit clueless at this point or they need reminding. Remind them, give them worksheets, give them guidance, and help them understand how to use these things. Because, yes, you're going to come back to it and keep reinforcing it to continuously and gradually build their writing skills. So, all right, so I think that is it for this presentation. Now, I generally use, like I said, remember we're talking multisensory learning. So we're dealing with helping students to understand the formal and the informal and to really stick with that formal tone and consistency. So in one of the previous sessions, I think we spoke about creating an avatar almost for the reader who's going to be reading the formal writing and who's going to also, separate reader reading the informal writing, which is the more descriptive one, the narrative. Now, at this level, we're reinforcing that concept by looking at the language that's related, but we're also trying to make it visual. So, what we're doing here is having students respond in an artistic way to a concept. And let's say they are now, there's a whole, what you call it, in the textbook. I think this is one of the activities I used in the textbook, investigating facts. It's about having this person, or was it in a classroom? Anyway, the student who is responding, they're putting themselves in the position of a designer, let's say, and they're dealing with, let's say, a celebrity, and this celebrity has events that they have to go to. So you can do a little backstory, get the students involved and engaged. Who do you want to design for? Somebody might say they want to design for Rihanna, and she's a designer too, so they need to be careful, right? What they put her in. so so we have Rihanna, we have Beyonce, um, who, LeBron James, we have, whoever this celebrity is, have students come up with their own ideas for the celebrity that they want to design for. And then they're going to a formal gala, like, maybe the Academy Awards or something. And then they're doing, a beach line in our local parlance. They're relaxing, they're on holiday or something, and they're just, chill, as some people say. So we have those two very different events. And you want to have the students create an outfit, create something that the person should wear, and then you could extend that. So we start with the artwork, what the person should wear. And then we also could look at creating an invitation. What would the invitation look like for a formal event? What would it look like for a more casual event? Then you want to engage students with this part of it, like what kinds of conversations are we going to have at this formal event? What kind of conversations are they going to have at the informal, relaxed, chilling kind of event? So, and have them, so it's a whole process. So we start with the artwork, and then we have them design the invitation, and then we can have them design, have them write out some conversation, or maybe just write two, three sentences. What do you think they would be speaking about? Give me a sentence that they would probably say. What are the topics? What topics would they maybe avoid? And so on. And then so you have this complete lesson that helps students really get to this respectful formal tone by using the multisensory aspect of the learning. So I hope you try it out. I've done it with students before, and they are very engaged. And then once it's done, when you're writing and you get to the point of completing essays, you can always tell them, hey, you know, are we formal or are we informal? You're not dressed right. The writing isn't dressed right. I mean, it sounds very abstract in the conversation, but sometimes that kind of thinking helps to stretch students' creative and critical thinking so that they can begin seeing things from different ways. And of course, depending on the student that you're working with, they may be better able to understand things once it gets visual and tangible than if it's just the thought about a thought. And that's why we really want to engage in the multisensory learning. Okay, so I think we're good with the report writing, and that's what I wanted to share with you. So we're looking at the formal tone, we're looking at building vocabulary, yes, but we're really looking at being respectful. We're looking at sentence types, the structure of sentences, coordinated, um subjective, was it subordinating, right? Coordinating and subordinating conjunctions. We're looking at that. We're looking at those complex and compound sentences. We're also looking at the whole feeling and atmosphere of the writing being formal, and we're dealing with the artwork and all of that. That would help. All right, so that is that. Now, let's see. Let's shift now or thinking to the narrative writing. And I don't have too many slides for the narrative writing. We're pretty much going back to the let me see if I can find it quickly. The slide that I had shown in one of the previous sessions about the development of conflict. So the last session we looked at the fact that conflict is absolutely necessary. And again, with that word absolutely, I have to find another way to say that. But conflict is required for the development of a narrative. And I'm going to repeat some of what I said, but again, remember we're talking repetition, reinforcement, and so on. It's uh, absolutely. I'm going to now that I have it in my head, I'm going to keep checking myself on that word. Absolutely. You know, we all have words that we use regularly. I guess absolutely is one of my favorites now. Um, so we really want to pay attention to how um conflict is used and how it develops in writing, because in the narrative, because the thing with the conflict is that without conflict there really is not going to be any effective rising action. Now, rising action is built on conflict. And the reason rising action is built on conflict is because if the main character doesn't care about anything, they're not trying to do anything, then nothing is even going to be stopping them. So if they're going this way and an obstacle comes up in their path, they just move and they go elsewhere because it doesn't matter. I didn't really need to go over there anyhow. And so then there's no real what we call pushback. There is no tension. There is no drama if the main character doesn't want something. So, continuing from the discussion that we had last week on the introduction to conflict and, why conflict is important, this week, you're reinforcing that by helping students recognize what do characters want. So always start with the character's goals. Now, in my classes and in dealing with students, I've noticed that students don't often think about what characters want, especially if it's, these intangible things like, just to have fun, or, they want to relax and sleep or something like that. Students don't often think about what a character wants, but it's something that really should be shown to them, and how that happens and what it is the character wants before the drama of the story. Because the minute you start talking about, okay, what does your character want? The first thing the student is going to do is to look at the problem in the story and say that what the character wants is to get over the problem, solve the problem, fix the problem. Now, of course, yes, that is something that characters will also want, but that is after the problem has been introduced. So, why is this thing a problem in the first place? What makes it a problem for the character? These are things at this point that you really want to discuss with your students, with your child, because understanding this is going to help them create effective conflict for the story. It is going to help them understand how important conflict is and what to do when they're writing their stories. So I'll give an example. I have a student who, when she came to me, um, she wasn't scoring quite well with the narratives. And mainly it was because her stories didn't have a clear structure. Even though narratives are free in terms of description and examples and emotions, and you want those things, there is still a structure. And we looked at that in terms of the plot development and that 12-point plot development. So after we went through that and she understood a little bit more about how to structure her stories, I gave her a prompt for her to develop. And she wrote, it was a very interesting and exciting story, and she really did demonstrate that she put in the work about practicing and understanding the plot development. But the conflict in the story wasn't directly related to the prompt. So even though it was a great story and she had made a lot of improvement in her writing, so much so that her mom mentioned it to me. She said, I'm seeing her stories now and they look, and they feel much better. They're much more exciting because they have structure. And this is something, just as an aside, most teachers believe that the excitement in a story is solely based on the description. Excitement in a story is based on the development of the plot, especially the rising action. And so understanding that comes first. It really, really comes first. And I'm going to give myself permission to use the word absolutely here. It absolutely comes first. So that's why we do plot development for so long in the beginning, and we come back to it often because it is what really is the backbone of a story. So in going through it with her, we realized that most SAA prompts, and we are going to touch on analyzing prompts, so we're going to get to all of these details later, but just for now, to understand this concept and this point that I'm making, most essay prompts give a scenario. They tell you, you were on a boat, you went fishing, or your dad, I think one of the ones that I'd used before is, your dad took you and your friends, a couple of your friends out on a boat and that kind of thing. So you're given a scenario, you're given a situation, and um write a story about that, or the prompt sometimes, quite often, tells you something happened, you know um a storm came up or something like that. So they give you a problem. Many prompts give you a problem. Not all of them, and for those that don't, if your students have challenges coming up with conflict and so on, even after the practice, my recommendation is just tell them avoid those prompts. They still would have choices. But of course, we're working diligently and helping students understand the different types of conflict and what they can do to generate conflict. And what have we discussed so far? Identify who your main character is. Yes, there are other characters, but there needs to be one main character which the story is following, and that character has to have some goals, or a goal. They must want something. So in a story like, your dad took you and your friends out fishing one day, what's the goal there? You want to have fun with your friends, you want to catch a fish. If that's the situation for you, then that would be the main character's goals. And then a storm comes up. That is the complication. That is the first problem that is going to present itself. So, the thing with developing the conflict in this story, read the prompt carefully, figure out if there is a conflict identified in the prompt, and start there. Because in the young lady's story, even though, and I mean, I felt really bad having to tell her we need to change this and we need to take out some things because it wasn't directly related to the prompt. I mean, it was an awesome story because now that she understood what to do and how to do it, she was all excited, and her descriptions were good. The development was awesome. It was just not directly what the story was, the prompt was requiring. So, and I told her, I said, listen, I feel bad about telling you take this out, but you can't keep it in. And this is something that writers across the board have to get used to, cutting things that they might like and want to keep. And It's something that I think students need to recognize with their writing. What they're aiming for is to create an effective response. Yes, the story has to be exciting and lovely, and we want all the descriptions and everything, but you are responding to a prompt and you need to keep that in mind. This is an exam and you're responding to something specific, and therefore it has to be directly related, whatever you put in your response. So start that conversation now. And like I said before, we're coming back to it over and over. When we deal with prompts, we'll come back to it. When we start writing full essays, we'll come back to it. In fact, the more we talk about conflict and setting and all these things, we'll keep coming back to it because we're responding to an exam prompt. And in order to get the most marks possible, we need to be clear in our response and make it as related as possible. So she understood. We made some changes. She added in some dialogue, and the story at the end was even more brilliant than she started off. So, once students understand that making changes is not hurting them, it's not saying anything about them as a writer, then they're more into it. So, again, this is early on, but you want to be planting all these seeds from now so that when we get to editing and revising, they're not but fighting you to keep things that don't work with their story. It is absolutely a challenge when you're dealing with a student and the student is constantly saying things like, well, Miss, I want to keep this. This makes sense. Why we have to take this out? I don't mind the questions now, because now is when we're explaining these things. But the closer you get to SEA, writing students should not be fighting you on keeping details. If they want to keep a detail, what is the reason for it? What's the rationale? How does it fit? If it doesn't fit directly, I can show them how to make it fit. You can show them how to make it fit, but not just because they want it, it has to stay. So there's a lot involved in this. And when I say a lot, I mean it's not just about writing. These are skills and strategies that can translate into life and translate into other aspects of a student's interaction with their peers and adults. Some, if you have a goal, you have an idea of how to get there, take the advice, take the guidance, try it out. We're practicing, see if it works. If you don't like it, figure out what works. And that's why we have the classes and the interaction, and we're coming back to it. So, no hard feelings across the board, because there was one particular point that the young lady said, Miss, I like that. And I say, I like it too, because it made sense, it worked, but it was just creating a problem in the development of the conflict. So we brainstormed about it and we figured out a way to add it into the story and make it relevant. And going through these kinds of processes, this is how students develop their critical and creative thinking. And I will always say that when it comes to narratives, many people think that this is just about the creative thinking with the descriptions and the vivid language and all those things. But there's a lot of critical thinking with narratives as well. So engage students in these kinds of conversations. So here's the thing with conflict development and narratives. Number one, you need to have a main character, and that character must have a goal in order for there to be any kind of conflict, because otherwise they're just floating, blowing in the wind. Wherever the wind carries them, they're there. But that's not what conflict is all about. Conflict is about you have to go this direction, the wind is blowing that way, so you have to keep pushing and leaning into it and, deliberately heading in a direction. So that's number one. Number two, you want to make sure that you read your prompt carefully to understand what is the conflict identified in the prompt, and then you start with that. And when I say start with that, I mean start the conflict with that. In the 12-point plot development, we have 12 points. Point one and two, that's background information. Who are the characters, where they are, what they want, what are they doing now, why are they doing it, those kinds of things. And then your complication, which is the beginning of the conflict and the beginning of your rising action, should start at paragraph 2. Now, I'm saying that quite loosely because you know how I feel about paragraphing and narratives. We work with a structure to help students understand it, but because of dialogue and because of how paragraphs are used in narratives, you can have many more paragraphs, short ones, long ones. Please don't tell your students or your children that they need to have 5 sentences in every paragraph in a narrative. You can have a 1 sentence paragraph. Why? Because you want readers to focus on that. Narratives are a little bit more flexible. Even the SEA style narrative is a little bit more flexible. Now, of course, that's not going to be the only paragraph. Other paragraphs will be more robust. Um, but when it comes to dialogue, there's a requirement format for dialogue and we have the indentation and all those things. So 1 sentence, one idea kind of thing. So we are going to get to that later on. We will be talking about paragraphing and so on because it's important to understand that while there is a flexibility, there is still a structure that you want to work with. And in narratives, just like reports, there's a reason for everything. Really awesome stories are awesome not only because of the character and the description, but because of the sequencing of the actions and the fact that things happen, they make sense a little bit. Characters' reactions make sense a little bit. So it's not like, wait, what? How that happened? We don't want our readers to have that kind of shock of jumping from point to point. That's why we have that 12-point plot development so students could follow and keep focused. So what are we saying about conflict? I'm going to repeat myself because yes, it's that important. I don't want you to miss it. Main character has a goal. Figure out what the conflict is in the prompt. Start your complication with that. By the second paragraph, you should be in your complication. And the reason for that is that we are writing flash fiction. We're not writing a novel or even what is considered a regular length short story, which I don't know, like 20 words is a short story. Yeah, 15,000, 20 words, 20,000 words, 15,000 words, 10,000 words. All of these are considered short stories kind of thing. And they're not anywhere near what SEA students are writing. We're writing microfiction, flash fiction, right? So we have to get to it quickly. We don't have a lot of time or space to develop these things. So we have to get to it quickly. And we can only get to it quickly if we start thinking about what the prompt is and starting with that complication in the paragraph 2 helps students focus their thoughts and their writing as well. So they're practicing plotting stories even from now in a kind of loose way. Next week, we'll be talking more about actually practicing plotting and some activities that can be done there. But we're working with the concept of conflict. What kind of conflict can pop up in any kind of situation? And we dealt with the 6 kinds of conflict: character versus character, character versus society, character versus self, character versus nature, character versus science and technology, character versus, there was another one, supernatural. Um, so students, we can discuss all of these things. So all right. Um we have the storm coming and we're out on the boat or the yacht or the ship and we're fishing. That's a character versus nature moment. Then we can have a character versus self, which really should always be included. You have to overcome your fear of swimming or your fear of being caught in a storm or whatever that is to really help your friends. Maybe you are the only one who can help them, but you have to overcome something in order to help them near the end. And that is why conflict 2 is going to be such a big issue, right? So conflict 2 is the most intense conflict simply because you're not just dealing with something on the outside, you're also dealing with the feelings and emotions that come with it. So, in developing conflict, we're looking at increasing emotions as we go. The same way the conflict is increasing, the character's emotional reaction would also be increasing. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful in terms of understanding conflict and how conflict is developed and how you actually get the rising action. Like I said, we're planting seeds, we're giving information, making sure students understand it because we are going to be coming back to it later on, talking about rising action and how everything is connected. It's a good idea for the repetition. Okay, so I think that is it for today, and we are the end of it. So we spoke about reports, we spoke about narratives. I welcome your comments and your questions. The more questions you ask, whether you want to private message me on Facebook or you want to send me a WhatsApp or comment under the video, let me know how things go. And if you're implementing any of these strategies, I hope you do because I use them and they work for me. I don't usually recommend things that I haven't tried or physically done myself with my own students. And I can tell you, I've been using these strategies and refining them over the years. So they absolutely work. They do take a little bit of time, which is why we're starting now. And SEA is a few months well away because we really want students to understand them. Okay, so again, comments, questions, like the video, subscribe to YouTube if you want to get the videos from YouTube whenever we post them there. So you don't have to be on Facebook to get a copy of it. It's also on my website. And I am, like I said, today is a little bit of an excitement for me. I'm doing the professional development tomorrow. I'll tell you guys how it went next week when I come back. If you want to check me for professional development for a group of parents or teachers to come to your school, message me and we can have a conversation about that, see how things go. All right. So thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.